Guten Tag and welcome to PA Dutch 101. This is video 32 in our series and we'll be covering the grammar topic adjective endings. This is a grammar-based video, and to understand the lesson in this video, you absolutely need to see the previous videos, especially the videos covering the nominative case, accusative case, and dative case. You need to know that material in order to comprehend what's happening in this lesson. So I would advise you to go back and watch those, and maybe watch them a second time just to refresh your memory on how those three cases work, because they're really going to come into play in this video. There is no Dutch words for adjective endings, so I just used the English here. This is going to seem like a lot. This is a very heavy subject in this lesson. I don't want you to be discouraged, though. It's not impossible, but it will take some work to really understand these and get good at these. So having said that, and hopefully not scaring you away, let's get going. So let's talk about adjective endings. In English, as in Pennsylvania Dutch, adjectives are used to describe a noun. That's not different. In English, adjectives are generally used after linking verbs or immediately before nouns. For example, after a linking verb, the house is big. Big is our adjective. It's talking and describing about the house. It's after the verb. We also in English will do this construction before a noun. The big house, ... Sentence keeps going. So here the adjective is in front of the noun. So in English we can put it behind or after, and notice that in English your adjective big doesn't change. It's always big. And it doesn't matter what we're describing. The big house, the big girl, the big book, or the house is big, the book is big, the girl is big. It doesn't matter. That's not the case in Pennsylvania Dutch. I'm sorry ahead of time. Alright. Now, let's talk about how it works in Dutch. In Pennsylvania Dutch, adjectives that follow linking verbs do not change. They don't take an ending. For example, the house is big. This house is gross. Gross is the adjective for big or great. Gross is gross. It stays the same. His house is gross. However, and here is where Dutch is very different from English. If the adjective that you're using is preceding the noun, meaning it's coming before the noun, then it takes special endings. And this is where we veer off course from English. There are three different situations that affect adjective endings. That's something else we have to keep in mind. Okay, let me just talk about that. So, if the adjective is after the noun, nothing happens. The only time something happens is when the adjective is before the noun. So when you want to say the big house, that's where adjective endings come into play. And there are three situations, and I'm going to outline the three situations. Situation number one, if the adjective is following a definite article, and remember, definite articles are the word the. So if they follow a definite article, der, die, etc. These are our endings. This lesson's going to give you a lot of charts. I would advise you to copy these charts down if you're keeping a notebook or whatever you're using supplementary to work through these lessons and videos. Following a definite article, der, die, das, etc., we have our genders, masculine, feminine, neuter, and plural, and we have the three cases that we've covered, nominative, accusative, and dative. If you notice, these endings are pretty easy. This does not mean put an X. It means there's no ending. The word stays the way it is. So for these six possibilities, neuter noun, feminine noun, masculine noun, and the accusatives, it doesn't change. However, in the dative case and in the plural, your adjective would get an E on the end. Okay? For example, I have a couple example sentences and I've highlighted the adjectives in red. Der junge Mann schreibt der junge Frau einen Brief. These adjectives are both following definite articles. Here, Mann is masculine and nominative, so no ending. Der junge Mann. However, Frau is feminine, and it's the dative case. Dative feminine, according to the chart we just saw, told me to put an E on the end. Der junge Frau. Okay? So that's why this one doesn't have an ending, and this one does. Here's another example. Die Großschule ist grad ums Eck rum. Again, our adjective groß is following a definite article, so we had to look at our chart. Schul is feminine. It's the subject, so it's nominative. According to the chart, feminine nominative, no ending, so it stays groß. Es alt Buch kommt von dem alten Mann. Here we have alt 2 times. Here it's following neuter, nominative, no ending. But here it's dative because of von. Dative masculine tells us to put an E on the end. Okay. Situation number 2. If your adjective is following an indefinite article, and your indefinite articles are your N words, a or an. Here's our chart. Now notice, here the endings change. So, going across in the nominative case, for masculine you put an ER on the end. For feminine you put an I. For neuter an ES, and for plural an E. The accusative line is exactly the same as the nominative line. You memorized this one, you got this one memorized already. Dative is different. Notice, E, 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 E. Okay? So, same rules apply as what we were doing before, but this time we're using these articles, these endings, if the adjective is following an indefinite article. Here are some sentences to show that. Those same sentences, but this time I changed the definite article to an indefinite article. Instead of saying the young man, I now have a young man. Ein junger Mann schreibt re junge Frau en Brief. Now you'll know why this time junger gets the ER, because now we have to look at chart number 2. We're following an indefinite article. Mann is masculine, and it's the subject, so it's nominative. So you have to look at that chart, and if we did, masculine nominative is an ER ending. Same way with this, it's dative, it's feminine, and it's following an indefinite article, r. So it gets an E. Notice that these endings are different from the previous sentence, because instead of having definites, we have indefinite articles. Here's a second example. Ein große Schule ist grad ums Eck rum. We're still using Schule, it's feminine, but it's now following an indefinite, and it's feminine, and it's nominative, so it gets an I ending, because that's what the chart told us to put on. Ein altes Buch kommt von dem alten Mann. Again, we're looking at our chart. Buch is neuter. It's the subject, so it's nominative. It's following an indefinite article, es ending. And Mann, it's dative because of von. Dative masculine, following an indefinite article, e ending. Okay. The third and final situation with adjective endings is if the adjective is not following anything. There's no definite article and there's no indefinite article. And to be perfectly honest, this doesn't happen very often. The other two situations are the ones that you run into the most. This one happens, but not as often. So this is if nothing's in front of it. Notice our chart. The nominative and the accusative are exactly the same. ER for masculine, I for feminine, nothing for neuter, and E for plural. Notice this time the dative one changes. EM, ER, EM, E. Okay? So jot this chart down and start memorizing these endings. They work exactly the same as the other two charts, it's just that it's a different situation. Okay? For example, sentences where nothing is, where it's not following anything. This time I want to say, young man, where do you come from? Now, the young is our adjective, Mann is still masculine, and it's still the subject of the sentence, so it's not following anything. Junger Mann, wo kommst du bei? That's why it has an ER ending, it's not following anything. Dicke Kinder sollen weniger essen und mehr spielen. Fat kids should or supposed to eat less and play more often. Now, Kinder's plural. It's the subject of the sentence, it's not following anything, so E ending on our adjective. Dicke Kinder sollen weniger essen und mehr spielen. Alright, now, on top of all of this stuff, it seems like a lot. You have 3 charts to memorize and all the rules. There's also some some notes to pay attention to, some, not exceptions, but things to watch out for. When working with these adjectives, the following rules apply. If your adjective ends in a B, when you add an adjective ending on, that B changes to a W. Here's an example. Lieb is nice. It also can describe, it also comes from the verb to love, lovely. So der Hund ist lieb. Now here, there's nothing following, there's no ending. But when we take that and turn this into an adjective ending, we now have to change the B to a W because that's what the exception says. So der ist ein lieber Hund. Okay? So the rule says we change the B to a W before we add our ending. If your adjective ends in a T, it changes to a D when we add an ending. For example, der Hund ist gut. But when we put it here, now we're adding an ending. Der ist ein guter Hund. Now the T changes to a D before we add our ending. Adjectives that end in E, add an N. An example, schön, pretty or nice. Die schöne Frau ist da. Here there's no ending, so it can stay the way it is. But in this one, we have to add an ending, an I, because of it following an indefinite article. And schöne, we add an N before we add our ending, because the adjective ends in an E, like the rule says. And schöne Frau ist da. And one other thing, this is pretty easy to remember. Two or more adjectives that modify or that are describing the same noun take the same ending. So, an example sentence, here we're saying, talking about a cat, it's not only a pretty cat, but it's also a good cat. It behaves well. So both of these are describing cat. They're both following an indefinite article, so they both get the same ending. And schöne, gute Katz schläft in der Scheier. Okay? So these both stay the same endings because they're modifying the same noun. Okay? I know this is a lot. Just stick with me on this. You're going to have to practice these though on your own. So let's do a little practice. Instead of me stopping and starting and stopping and starting, I'm going to go through and explain the answers, and maybe that'll help as well. So, here, I'm giving you the adjective in parentheses. I want you to put the correct ending on the adjective if one's needed. You've got to look at the sentence. So, der, and I want to say alt Schulmeister ist am Lesen. So we want to say the old teacher is reading. Okay? Now, you have to ask yourself the two questions. Question number one, what is the gender of the noun I'm dealing with? In this case, Schulmeister is masculine. Then you have to say, what case am I working in? Well, it's the subject of the sentence, so it's nominative. And the third and final question you have to ask yourself, what is the adjective following? In this case, it's a der word, so it's a definite article. So now you know what chart to look at. You look at your first chart. Then you look at the chart for masculine, nominative. And you will find out that there's no ending on this one. Der Altschulmeister ist am Lesen. Notice that was a three-step process. It's like solving a math equation. It's a three-step process to get to our answer. Here's another one. Oh my gosh, look at all these adjectives. I want reich, which means rich, arm, which means poor, and warm, which means warm. Now notice, ask yourself the questions. We're dealing with Frau, we're dealing with Mann, and we're dealing with Rock. And if you forgot Rock, I'm telling you that it's masculine. Alright. So, what I usually tell my students if we're doing practice like this, above the nouns, I would have them say, okay, put a little M if it's masculine, a little F, a little N for feminine neuter, and then a slash, and then what case it is, nominative, accusative, or dative. This is the subject, so this is going to be nominative. Frau is feminine, so feminine nominative. Mann is masculine. It's the indirect object, so it's dative, masculine dative. Rock is masculine, it's the direct object, so it's accusative. Now we've discovered that. Now we got to look at what we're following. All three of these are following indefinite articles, so it's chart number 2. Look at chart number 2, plug in the answers. You would get en reiche Frau kauft mit arme Mann and warme Rock. The endings come straight from the table, okay? But you got to check those out, and now hopefully you understand how I got to that. How about one more? Kaffee is coffee, it's masculine, and I want to say good coffee, schmeckt mir artig viel. So, coffee that tastes good or good coffee, I really like. It literally tastes me very well. Now, coffee's masculine, I'm telling you that. It's the subject of the sentence, so nominative. And gut is our adjective, and we're not following anything, so look at chart number 3, and then plug in the answer. Guter Kaffee, schmeckt mir artig viel. Note, the T changes to a D because that was one of our extra rules to remember, okay? Now, you're probably sitting there thinking, this is ridiculous. It's a 3-step process to get just an adjective ending? Yeah, it is. Is it ridiculous? I think at first it seems a little overwhelming, and yeah, maybe a little ridiculous. But Pennsylvania Dutch isn't the only language that does this. If you've studied German before, this will all be like, to you it'll be, oh yeah, I remember doing this in German, and I had to do all these steps to get to the answer. If you've never studied German before, or a language that doesn't do this, yeah, it is overwhelming at first, especially because we don't do anything like this in English. But in Dutch we do. So, first off, take a deep breath. You're going to be okay. It's a lot, but once you get in the habit of figuring out, okay, gender, case, and what am I following? Those are 3 questions to ask, okay? Then, the biggest thing you have to do is start memorizing those charts so that you don't have to constantly go back and look at them. Something to think about. Some other things to think about. As I just gave you your little pep talk, adjective endings can be very difficult at first, but do not give up on them. They're not impossible. Difficult? Yes. Impossible? No. Try to memorize the ending charts as quickly as possible. That's my best bit of advice. Because if you have those memorized, then you don't have to go looking at them. It cuts out a step of the process, so to speak. Now, when you're encountered with these, for each situation, ask yourself these 3 questions. Question number 1. What am I following? What is my adjective following? That tells me what chart to access in my brain. Question number 2. What is the gender of the noun? Masculine, feminine, neuter, plural. This goes back to early on in the video series when I said, when you learn a new noun, memorize the gender. If you have genders memorized, this makes this step easier. You don't have to go look in the dictionary. Oh, what's the gender of Stuhl, for example? If it's up here, that makes that step a lot faster. And finally, what case is the noun is? Is it the subject, nominative? Is it the direct object, accusative? Or is it the indirect object, dative? Also, don't forget that prepositions, as we talked about before, will also affect the case of a noun. So watch for all those things. By the time you're getting to this lesson, there are a lot of things at play here in the language. And all the stuff we've covered, there's nothing that you need to know to do these that hasn't been talked about in a previous video. So if you still feel shaky on the dative case, go back and rewatch the dative video. Same way with the video on accusative. If you still don't remember, oh, what are the accusative prepositions or how's the accusative case work, go back and watch the video again. Alright? Finally, and this is what's most frustrating, I think, for a lot of my students. Many native Pennsylvania Dutch speakers do not always use the correct endings. Don't be discouraged by that. Learn the endings and do them properly yourself. Okay? You're going to get into maybe conversations if you have the luxury of knowing a native speaker that you can practice with or talk with. Sometimes they're not going to use the correct adjective endings. That's okay. It has to do with some of the facts of how they learned the dialect. And maybe their parents, who they learned the dialect from, maybe they didn't use the adjective endings correctly all the time. So what? Don't let that stop you from using them correctly. Okay? At the same time, I don't want you to get so hung up on these adjective endings that when you're trying to talk to somebody, you're actually stopping your speech and you're calculating in your head what the correct adjective ending is. In that event, you're engaged in a conversation with somebody. Just get the Dutch out there. They're going to be happy that you're just using the right words. And at this point, as a language learner, I'm happy that you're using the right words too. Adding the correct endings is the next step. It's taking it another step. Now, I want you to eventually strive for that perfection. But for right now, you know, if you feel overwhelmed and you're just trying to get out a sentence like the good dog, and just saying the good dog, whether it's the right ending or not, I want you to be able to do both, but for the, as a beginner, as an introduction into the language, being able to just say the good dog and not have the correct ending. That's okay for now. But eventually, I don't want you to settle for that. I want you to strive to also be able to do it correctly, completely correct, with the endings and so forth. Whew. We can now take a deep breath. That was a crazy lesson. It's a lot of information with adjective endings, and they are scary. I will not say they aren't, because they are, especially for someone that hasn't learned a language before, learned a foreign language before. This is a lot of stuff going on, and it is seriously like a math problem. You have to answer questions. You have to complete steps in order to get to the answer that you need. Practice, practice, practice. Start making up sentences. Look around your house. Colors are great. If you see that your armchair is brown, start making a sentence. The brown armchair is big. Or the brown armchair is in the living room. Then turn it around and say, a brown armchair is in the living room. And then say, brown armchair, it is in the living room. There would be accessing all three of the charts and practicing. Okay? Do that with other nouns. It's a good way to also build vocabulary. That's it for now. I hope I didn't scare any of you away from Pennsylvania Dutch just because of our adjective endings. But for now, bis die nächste Video. Mach's gut und schwätz Deutsch.